Greetings. Welcome to Elect Connect, a candidate forum brought to you by the Greater Bloomington Chamber of Commerce. I'm Mary Morgan, the Chamber's Director of Advocacy and Public Policy, and we're here with Mark Powell, who is a Democratic Party candidate running for Congress in District 9. Before we get started, I would just like to take a moment to, first of all, thank our sponsors. Without them, this could not be happening. So those sponsors are German American, Bunker & Robertson, the City of Bloomington, Hoosier Energy, Smithville, and Indiana University. And again, we thank them very much for their support. We are, again, as I said, welcoming Mark Powell, Democratic Party candidate for the U.S. House of Representatives, District 9. And welcome, Mark.
Well, thank you, Mary. Thank you to the Chamber and all the sponsors that are allowing this to happen today. And in this strange congressional election, it's wonderful to have this opportunity to share my views about how the business community can prosper in Bloomington and in the entire 9th District. Good.
Well, I hope you can start out by just telling us a little bit about yourself and why you're interested in running for this office.
Sure. I'm an ordained Lutheran pastor. I have spent a good number of years of my ministry as a hospice chaplain in Johnson County, and I'm a native Chicagoan to begin with. Went to I'm Roman Catholic in my background, born and raised, but went to a monastery right after high school when I was 17. Studied for the Catholic priesthood at St. Ambrose University in Davenport, Iowa, and got my bachelor's of arts in political science. And then the bishop appointed me to the Vatican, and I studied at the Vatican for a year in 1980-81, and then came back and spent a good number of years in the radio broadcasting business. Had my own LLC for a couple of cycles and did political consulting, and then worked for the House of Representatives in Michigan for 3.5 years as chief of staff to the Associate House Speaker. And I always like to say I spent a number of years in my ministry as kind of ministering to the politicians. And I always like to say I did two things that I'm very proud of. I didn't get arrested, and I kept my soul intact, which is quite an accomplishment. And then went to seminary and then got ordained and have been in ministry. And I just feel that this is kind of an extension of that. Even though I believe strongly in church, the separation of church and state, I think there's a role for good pastors in Congress. And of course, the first Speaker of the House of Representatives was a Lutheran pastor, Frederick Muhlenberg.
Right, well, thank you. Our first question is coming from a member who wants to know your plan for helping small businesses thrive and grow, especially in the era of COVID-19.
Yes, of course. And this, I think, is the key, because not only are we going to have to deal with the initial physical pandemic, but there's also this financial pandemic that we're going to have to face, not only for the next Congress coming in January, but also, I think, over the next decade, of how we're going to move not only our district forward, but also the United States forward. And I think a lot of that has to deal with the type of climate that we have for the consumer. You know, we've built our economy not only in small businesses but also in large businesses on the notion that the consumer is going to drive the economy and going to move the stock market forward. Now, what we have seen over the past few weeks is that even though the economy has been put on pause, the stock market still is going up. But that's because of the action of the Congress by getting $2.5 trillion into the Federal Reserve, which has buoyed up the stock market. But that doesn't show the real economy going. What's necessary is for the average citizen to be able to cut their debt, because we've grown to a major society where debt is the key. And we need to cut our debt, because if we don't do that, if Congress doesn't act and the president doesn't act in terms of cutting the average American, especially the middle class American and the working class American, to be able to free them from the shackles of their debt, then we're going to not have people to be able to buy things. And that not only is going out and enjoying the restaurants in Bloomington, but also being able to go out and buy large items like automobiles and SUVs, and to go out and buy homes, and with that to buy large appliances. So one of the first things that I would do is to make sure that this question of debt is brought up in the new Congress, and to cut the amount of debt. And again, that should be done through the committee process. But I would think that 50 to 75% of individual debt needs to be addressed. And once we do that, it's what I call, we've been living under the past at least 40 years with this top-down, trickle-down economy, and it hasn't worked. 40 years should teach us that it hasn't worked. We're still in a pickle this day because of that. And in my view, to be fair and just as a society, it should be bottom up, because quite frankly, the top is going to get it anyway. But what it needs to do is to go through those who are in the working class, those who are in the middle class, so that they might be able to spend and consume. And that's what our economy is about.
Well, I think you've touched on this, but maybe you can elaborate. In addition to support for small business, which the previous question was focused on, what other federal legislation would you advocate for to help communities in District 9 as they emerge from the coronavirus's economic fallout?
Yes, I just think that what we have to do is we have to look at the middle class, and we have to look at the working class. We have to look at small businesses as they are, and make it easier for them to get through this period of time. And so for small businesses especially, the way these bills have been crafted in Washington, and I think this is a very important matter, Mary, that not only the members in Bloomington, but small businesses throughout the United States need to know that when these bills are crafted, the way that they get to be crafted in a way that is going to be a betterment for all of small businesses is that they have to have input from the members of the committee. And not only that, but then I'll also have a debate on the floor and have it read a few times and debated a few times before it's brought to the floor for a final vote, and then brought over to the Senate for their action. And then if that's however the Senate acts, if it's brought back for another conference committee and sent over to the White House for a signature. That takes a little bit of time, but but there's wisdom in that. And what we've had over these past few weeks, and even though I know that we're in a national emergency, these types of expenditures of $2.5 trillion need to be thought through, and it needs to be thought through by those who have been duly elected and have concerns in their district. Now, I'm sure there are folks in this district, in our district, in the 9th district, that have applied for these types of small loans, and they still are waiting. Now, there could have been a different way of dealing with how to get those out. Now, there were $6 billion that was spent in this last tranche that was passed by the Congress on Friday. There was very little debate on that. Only floor debate was on it. There weren't committee hearings on that. Now, $6 billion of that was meant for the community banks to process those loans. Now, the additional money that $60 billion could have been put into the small business loans if we would have filtered that money through, say, FEMA and the direct assistance program that FEMA normally has in issues like this, where there's a hurricane or if there's a tornado that devastates a community, devastates a state. Those funds go through FEMA and go directly to those small businesses. Now, that's the way that I think it should have been handled in the first place, because what is needed is a quick injection of funds to small businesses so that they could stay alive. But there's a question, there's not a question of them going out of business. And that the key, especially in small businesses, that they would keep their employees on the payroll. And that should be key in terms of how to handling this situation at this time. But when people are bought and paid for by Wall Street banks, usually they'll do Wall Street bank bidding, but that isn't the average person that runs a small business in Bloomington, Indiana. And those are the type of people that I think the congressman, and hopefully the next congressman, and hopefully I'll be that next congressman, will be able to advocate for very strongly in Washington.
So aside from issues related to COVID-19, what are your other priorities for Congress?
Well, I think first and foremost, you have to have a congressman that's representative of the district. And Mr. Hollingsworth hasn't been out in the district in the 4 years that he's held this office. And to be quite frank and honest with you, I don't know why we put up with it. He might be a fine human being and a good family man, and that's all fine and good. But the office of the representative to Congress has to be somebody that's out and engaged. And that's what I would be as your congressman, and what I'd like to do, especially for the business community, not only in Bloomington, but throughout the 9th District, is to form a Congressional Business Council, where members from throughout the district, business leaders throughout the district, would be on that council, that we would talk weekly, that there would be folks that would come out to Washington as part of this council activity, and that I would host a number of events in DC, but I also would host a number of people coming back from DC that would come back into the district, and that we would have roundtable events regularly. That the congressman should be someone who's at truly the beck and call of the citizens. And that's why I have said on many occasions that the cell phone number that I'm giving out now is the same cell phone number I'll have in Washington. And if you have a question and you have a concern, call it up. And if I'm not on the other end, leave a message, and I'll get back to you. I'll have somebody get back to you immediately. That's the type of citizen service that I think that needs to be in Congress. I've worked on staff in the Michigan House of Representatives, also a legislative assistant in the Kansas House of Representatives. I know what an effective office of a representative should be run like. And so I have a certain agenda that it has to have open communication for the citizens, and especially for those who have put in their time and their money, that have formed businesses and employ individuals. That's an important thing that we need to shore up and not forget about. But that comes from having an accessible congressman. The other thing I've been fortunate enough to have in my life, I'm 60 years old, is I was in the radio broadcasting business for quite a number of decades. And so what I have promised, if I'm nominated in the Democratic Party, if I'm elected in November, that I would host a call-in show every Saturday afternoon, not only on the radio stations in Bloomington and down in Salem at WSLM, WBIW out of Bedford, and Freedom 95.9 out of Johnson County. That would cover the entire district in terms of radio stations, but also have it on the internet, and to have it unscripted, have it unscreened, the phone calls. If you have a problem with Washington, I want to hear about it, and I want to hear about it live so that everybody hears about it. You know, there has to be more transparency in how our government works. And I feel firmly that the political leaders have to be the first ones to lead. And that's what's missing, I think, in politics today. And I think that has to change. So it's that type of openness. It's that type of trying to understand what's going on in the district, having the heartbeat of the district. And, for Mr. Hollingsworth, for all of his success, his $50 million that he has in his bank account, that's fine and good. And I don't begrudge him one dime of that. But it's hard for somebody that has $50 million to understand what the plight of the middle class individual is in the 9th Congressional District. I am from the middle class, and I will represent the middle class. I'll fight for the middle class, because let me say to you, Mary, that in 2021 and in the next years of this decade, is going to be critical in terms of how the middle class is going to survive in the United States. And I think we need people that are going to be strong advocates for the middle class and for the working class. And unless we have that, there are many multimillionaires in the Congress as it is, and it really hasn't helped a great deal for the middle class and the working class and the small businesses in this country. And so I think it's time for a change, and that's why I'm offering this change up in my candidacy. Now, if you're going to vote, you're going to have to probably vote by mail-in ballot, and so you're going to have to ask for an application. You're going to have to say, I want a Democratic ballot. Now, I understand for a lot of business owners that might be a first, but let me just say that if you choose that Democratic ballot, and if you vote for Mark J. Powell, if you choose that candidate, that I guarantee you that that candidate's going to be working for you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and I think you can hear it in my voice.
I think we can. So you have actually, I think, addressed the next question, which was talking about how you would communicate with your constituents. So I think it's about time we need to wrap up. What other final thoughts do you have to share with us today?
I just have to say, and you hear this from a lot of political candidates, that this election is the most critical election of their lifetime. But I firmly believe that. I think if we don't send somebody to Washington in January that has in their heart the empathy of every citizen in this district, that we all are going to suffer. I was talking with somebody from Crawford County here just about 48 hours ago, and he was saying that the folks in Crawford County normally would have about 300 people in the food lines, and they've quadrupled that number. And I'm sure that's happening not only in Monroe County, in Johnson County, it's happening in Marion County, all throughout the country. It's because of the situation that we're in. And we're in very desperate times. And what you need is somebody that's going to think out of the box, somebody that's not been bought and paid for by the Wall Street bankers that have controlled the DNC and the RNC. And oh, heck, Trey Hollingsworth got $2,200 from the DNC folks. Did you know that? $2,200 from the DNC folks, they're Republican. So it doesn't matter. As I looked at it, what has happened in this country is that there is one party that's running it, and the illusion of choice. But let me just say to you that if you nominate me in the Democratic Party, and if I take that case to Mr. Hollingsworth in the fall and am successful and am seated in the Congress in 2021, that there will be a little bit of a dust-up, because what's needed is a change not only in the House of Representatives, but in the entire institution itself. And that's going to take somebody with some vision and thinking out of the box. And if those who will get to know me will see that's the case. First and foremost, I am a listener. I think in 9 years of being a hospice chaplain has given me that skill. And when people are on their deathbed, and I've been with many of them, when time is short, what's needed is a listening ear. And to be quite honest with you, I think if we don't act now within these few months, and then going into the next Congress, and make sure that the middle class and the working class are provided for, what we'll face is a neo-feudalistic society, which will be a horror not only from my daughter, but also for but for your children and your grandchildren. And I would hate to see that for the United States. We're the greatest country, I believe, in the world. And we have accomplished many things over our course of our history, and we have many great things to accomplish. But we have to change the way things are going. And that's what I'm looking forward
right.
to.
Well, thank you very much. We really appreciate the fact that you were able to share some time with us today. And just to remind people, we've been talking with Mark Powell. He's a Democratic Party candidate for U.S. House of Representatives District 9 in the June 2nd election. One more shout out to our sponsors for Elect Connect. We really appreciate their support. German American Bank, Hoosier Energy, Smithville, City of Bloomington, Indiana University, and Bunger and Robertson. And finally, just a reminder to vote in the primary on June 2nd. And in this particular election, all voters are eligible to vote by mail. We would encourage you to do so. You can get more information about how to do that at monroecountyvoters.us and find out more about the candidates at our website, chamberbloomington.org/2020-primary-election. Thanks so much.